So let's take a seat on the bolster, nothing in front of it, just your legs. And let the legs reach in front to the heels. And as you assert that movement of the heels pushing away, you want to let your hips and like the hip basin be providing direction to kind of root the pelvis. So I would encourage you to put your hands so that they're right at the top layer of the legs, around the hip basin. So I suppose it's more connected up into your pelvis versus the leg piece. And then I want you to let your left leg lift and cross over the right leg. So the knee is poking up. The left foot, when it steps down, if this is a little difficult for your footing to cross the leg, you can have your foot on the inside of the right leg too. Okay, you could do either. And as you hold on with your hands interlacing under your left knee, let your spine center, tilt your right ear to the shoulder and the left ear, and let this kind of motion pivot. But I want you to notice that you have these variations with your upper spine, right? It's a pretty clear directions you can make. Pivoting through your head. And then take a twist. Left hand reaches back to the blanket, barely touching to it. Hook the right elbow to the left knee. And I want you to just get a feel for your rotation and provide circulation option. Remember, all parts of your spine move with a twist. Even if you feel like you're locked and fixed in the lumbar, there are parts that have to filter movement. So just take this for a few more seconds. We're just kind of getting a baseline for our shoulders and our spine. Good. And then come back center and switch the leg that's crossed, left leg forward, right leg crossing. Hold underneath that right knee. So let that left foot reach through the heel base. And then when you're holding on firm, see if you can place that quality of firm with the spine up. Now that seems obvious that you're sitting tall, but noticing the detail of tilting your head side to side, and can you still embody that sense of lift from the tailbone? I find it a little murky, to be honest, that I'm experiencing a lift off, and I feel as if I have to put a little energy into sitting upright. And then turn to your right hand back, left arm is reaching to the outside of that right leg and then twisting torso. Or is it your shoulders? Or is it your spine that has the most of the enthusiasm in this? I mean, most of this position is rather challenging for breathing muscles. So give it one more moment of rotation to the right. Breathing. And turning forward, take a block, uncross, and then slide that block so it's in front of your bolster and it's in its lowest setting, directly underneath your legs, but it's stuck right next to the bolster. You can tape it to it, and then scoot so that you're sitting on the block. And then as you lower back, the 2 blankets is an option, meaning as you center your hips and your lumbar spine and thus the thoracic, if you move your head to your blankets and it feels like your chin is pushing in and you can't quite get on the back of your head to the blanket, then it's really a personal choice if you want 2 blankets or 1 under your head. Okay, so take the position where the waist is kind of broadening here, and then add some sand. Even if you prefer sand on your hips, or maybe you have 2 sandbags, you have 1 on the hips and 1 on the ribs, we're going to reach the feet straight down. And then when the legs are in that moment of centering, and actually you have to recruit muscles to keep them kind of in a bound positional. experience. Then take that sand so that maybe we should try to have it on the front of the thighs so that if you have two, you can add that to your ribs, but you might want to be sure you have one on the legs. And realizing as you spread open your arms and your rib, heart, chest is flowing wide, experiencing what feels comfortable for your head and neck. You might try getting rid of the blanket and then realize, well, that was worth having. It's just kind of in the moment, because it will add some sensation of stretch in your chest if you remove it. And that could feel good on your shoulders or not. So work on that spreading of the chest and the intercostals. And then let's take our feet so they're separating a little more. And then you're relaxing your pressure of trying to keep them firm in tone and perfect. So you just let your feet separate so the legs are basically in a nice parallel pattern for the most part with the feet. But I imagine you're going to have a little bit of external rotation down into the ankle. But recognize when the shoulders are back. You have a pile of shoulders under you and a lifted rib cage, elevating with the inhale and exhale. Even on the exhale, there's elevation due to the props. Let's be here for a few moments, setting our focus in practice to breathing. Feeling the in-breath, relaxing on the out-breath. Maybe letting your head nod. And adjustments for the arms are helpful, but sometimes letting your arms find the reality of the shape and keeping them as even as possible, the weight. And this practice has a good amount of waiting, time in a pose, patience, attitude building. So let's take Badakanasana. And as we move our sand, you can keep one on the ribs if there is that detail you like. Otherwise, as the knees start to slide out via the feet sliding together, we position the shoulders. So now at this point, I can tell that 2 blankets is comfortable, but it may not be the best for my structure. So you have to kind of find what can you do structurally to either keep those 2 blankets or feel what it's like when you lower down, and then you work with opening the chest more, because that elevation distribution lowering down will encourage this openness of the ribs, the movement of the ribs, the oxygen ratio, right? All that increases. It's the subtleties that you're encouraging here. So feel the band of the legs, the feet together, and how the knees are motioning out. Even though they feel still, there is some vibration in the inner thigh that kind of continues, or it stays the same intensity. Okay, so today when we move and flow the rhythm of the spine, I want you to have one focal point when you get into an inversion. So there's the focal point of the rhythms of the arches of the back, the bone rhythm. So with the feet together, see if you can kind of loosen up that intensity. So instead of my feet pushing and trying to get them higher, I'm going to slide them a little downwards. And then notice maybe differences on left and right leg, right? That becomes a little more obvious when your feet are not so hugged in. Maybe not for you, but. And then you want to find a place where the adductors do have a felt sense of deepening circulation before we get the legs upside down. So you have something to flush out. Good idea. So shoulders resting, heart way open. Breath cycling now through a very toned core. Now feeling how that core is going to get a little less tone in the next few moments when we get our feet up. So start to bring the knees to point up. And then as you scoot your feet towards your seat, you may as well let your heels have a little bit of lift. And then as the tailbone kind of presses, that seems to be a pattern we take on to release things that might be coming, right, like tension. So we're going to push the block out to the side or just reach down for it and move it. And then you're now on one blanket. If you have two, lower it to one under your head. And then push the bolster and start with just a little bit under your back. Push it a little bit down, then center your back. Okay, notice you want it any further down. So the further you go down with it in the beginning, then you have to back up. So start with the feeling that, oh, that supports my back. You can always push it down further a little bit. It seems like it's too far up. And then take a block and bring it one knee at a time up, and then add your block between the knees and center. Yeah, and if you feel like you're in this level with your bolster and it's a little tough right now to hold the block and maintain balance and structural support, then you need your bolster lower. So just keep in mind, you can always put your feet down, scoot your bolster just a tad, and then try the knees up again. Now with the elbows open, the hands back in cactus, we're going to move our knees and side to side as they go. The hips are going to start to kind of get a little bit of flowing motion. So, go for it, right? Maybe you move your knees over and you feel like you're about ready to get off of the bolster because you pushed over so far. So your bolster's not going to all of a sudden slide away from you. So trust in the prop. And then may the prop be with you. Have the block between the knees so that it keeps a spacer in your back. Yeah, you can do these types of motions minus a block, but for today's purpose, it's like we want to create space here in the area that we're crossing over, that you feel some felt sense of hip, outer hip. Yeah, so let your body reach the knees to either side and then notice, kind of scan the feeling in the outer hip and then opposite side. And then feel when you have the legs in that position, can you squeeze the knees in towards the chest? So you make a circle with the knees and try to take this into the not very big circles, right? Not too much, just the right amount that you have control with in your stomach, and then go the other direction. We're just gonna kind of tease the back with this one for a few moments. Not take it too seriously. Okay. Now, if feeling movement with a block between the knees is useful, try it without the block, just this circling, and go both directions, maybe 2 to 3 times each direction minimal. And then get a feeling in your back of, maybe it was the same, and get a belt. It's kind of moving at a little bit of a fast clip, but we'll get to stillness at some point. Okay, take a belt under your right foot. The right foot stretches, well, the leg stretches. I don't know if your foot is getting the most of a stretch as far as the composition, but maybe you can organize the energy around feeling the band at the bottom, the belt, and then find a place on your foot. Maybe kind of slide it to the ball, to the arch, or maybe you get a feeling of your weight of holding the belt and just that right amount of tugging on the belt. So you're in the driver's seat as far as intensity, but I think we regulate this one. I don't have a memory of doing this one, like aggressively pulling and thinking that's going to do good in this pose. So I suppose the directional shift will be how much you move your leg back, right? So it's a hamstring mobility. And it probably doesn't swing back entirely overhead, so you have some muscle guarding to get to this position. You get that feel of that leg when it's moving back. As you feel the hands holding the belt, instead of letting the foot push back towards the base of your mat directionally or pushing up, try to keep that angle on the leg and then take the belt together. So you close it off and you hold it with your left hand. And then you cross that right leg to the left. But when you're crossing, use this kind of reality of the bolster supporting your hips and supporting the pelvic motion. And then open that right arm out. Maybe you have some props to move away, but crossing that right leg over to the left. Good. And get a feel for drawing the leg a little bit back, versus working with, well, you've got to use your arm energy a little bit to acquire that, don't you? It's not like your leg is going to have the mobility that you need, muscular awareness in the arm as well as some mobility in your hip joint. If it's not something you're doing very often, you'll notice it can be a little bit uptight. The hip gets screwed into a position and it gets more grippy as you stomp on the foot. So these reclining poses are really good for these joints, suppleness. And then that circulation into the kidneys, right? It's also really ideal. So the reason I want you to emphasize kind of pulling the leg right now a little bit back, right, versus, straight across or downstream, is because we're going to be doing this shape towards the end with the bolster under the leg, and that's usually across, straight across with the hip. So let's try bending the right knee. You still have your leg across. And my hope is that the twist feels a little bit safer than when you're sitting twisting, right? You can kind of feel more freedom through the lumbar and then the lower thoracic. Feel safe. And as you let the leg guide you back to the center line, you'll lift up the left foot and just take both hands to hold the belt, left leg straight up, right leg lowers down, kind of moving on through. And then when you start that switcheroo, you get a feel for the foot and the calf. And maybe how do you like the belt? Do you like it the same place? Or did you start with really high up on the bottom of the foot? Or do you feel more satisfied with it in the center? That's where I think is interesting, is to supply an arrangement of your sequencing so you work with yourself where you are now, what feels best. Okay, and then maybe that leg is capable of moving a little bit back, but likely the right leg when it's down, I know you could have sand and all those things, but we're simplifying it. I guess sand makes it simpler too. It grounds you. But when you're guiding your leg back, notice what part of the back of the leg feels the possibility of going further. or if it's just really rigid, that happens. So breathing, that could feel what flows, like let the breath move, and then feel that you try on the exhales. Okay, close off the belt, reach with the right hand, and then left hand on the left hip. I know the bolster's kind of in the way, but just get a feel of your hand to your left hip or the very top of the thigh, where you feel the sense of the ball on its top that kind of pushes out sometimes because it's tense in this position. So when we cross the left leg over to the right, I want you to guide the bones. So remember what we work with when we're thinking bone density is resistance. So poses, you need to create resistance. That's the one thing you can do with yoga, but you have to create that. But I think it's kind of easy sometimes because you feel where there's resistance and then you breathe into that and stay. So the left leg crosses, we try to keep it moving. Maybe you pull the leg a little bit up, right? So you're trying to lift it towards like your right shoulder. You may not touch down. Your knee may need to bend. Just accept where you are with your range of motion. And it might look similar side to side, but feel really different. Left arm open. It might look the same, but it just is a dramatic change in sensation. So breathing similar, even when it gets tough. You know, when that right hand is holding, I sometimes feel like I can muster it up and stay with it. But it's a little bit of an energy drain. So when you bend that left knee and we bring the left leg back up center, slide the right foot in, get both hands on the belt and bring that right foot up into the belt. Push your feet. And since you got this whole belt, I know it doesn't feel like a big belt once your feet go out wide. You know, where's the rest of the belt? Because the feet take over that whole span. So adjust it like if you were, you're emphasizing a wide stance. All right, so it should feel like you're using the whole belt. Now, if you were standing on your feet, taking this shape, I don't think you'd have this type of spine shape and support. This is a great way to get the reversing the flow of gravity in the legs, in the organs, the great wide stance position. Okay, so the feet are flexing, they're not turning in excessively nor out. If you could put a block on the bottom of each foot and it should be able to sort of hold it. Let's not try to add that at this time, unless you have an assistant. So when you're pulling, can you move your hands so that, not that anyone has their hands wrong, but so that they're a little farther down versus pulling them back. So if you kind of slide your hands, you have to kind of wrangle it to get there. You're holding, so you're trying to get your arms to widen as well. Same thing. As if we were in a standing pose, we were trying to get the hands to the legs. We can't quite access this here, but get a feel of that width. Okay, slide, just pull the belt and your feet go together. Bend your knees, exchange the belt for a sandbag on the feet, and then go right into the feet pushing the sand. In the beginning, you might find that you're feeling like you need to be a little farther forward on the bolster. That's what I think I need to do. So when I scoop my sand on the bottom of my feet and push straight up, I have that range of lift. Now it's different than the feet out as far as the flush of the legs, a little different. We're trying to get all of the flushing we can do. But when the belly moves with the breath, you can study this a little more than when your hands are pulling onto something. So access the shoulders back, the elbows open into cactus. And let's come into stillness for several moments here with that physicality of the feet flexing and the lifting potential, and then that flushing of the fluid that builds up in the bottom of our body and our legs and our feet. Resting the eyes, brain, and breathing with the belly actively lifting and relaxing. If you can let that lifting and lowering to become a field of movement that is soothing, would be helpful. Just feeling movement of core as a soothing opportunity. Great. Take a few more. Okay, so now when we shift this sense of the circulation in our lower beam, I think it takes a little time to feel this inversion awareness in your ribs, in your breathing collection. I do think this one grows on you over time, like decades, but when you're still kind of assembling the basic foundations, and when you shift down, let's bring the knees to bending. And I would just, if you can trust it, let your sand kind of toss. If you like to manage it by your side, that's okay. But feel this squeezing of the knees in, okay? Then move the knees to kind of point up to the ceiling, side to side, without block, okay? So this starts to get those ribs moving. Now just keep going to the left with the knees and then roll to that left side, slide down the bolster. So the bolster is still horizontal. I guess we could be really interesting and twisted at that moment, but we'll play with that another time. So take a blanket stack. If you know your side sage pose needs a little more blanket, you can take the top one and fold it. So you have a little more height under your head. But some of us might like to have that length. So a block perhaps, and over the blankets, other side. And then if you have a ball inside the right knee, if you don't, you stretch the leg far back. And then we come into this side experience with the waist. Well, you can always kind of work a little bit with inching more on that left side of the torso on the bolster. So you could reach your elbow through between the bolster and the blankets, and then maybe get a little more of that reach between, and then get your sand. But you can't do that with both hands. Maybe you won't be able to use the sand, but get that sand to kind of rolling pin down your side. Okay. So the sand can be across, it could be lengthwise, you can have it in either of these directions, right? Doesn't have to be across your hip. And if it gets kind of pinched on there, you might take extra time to balance your sand support. You can always reset it after you think you got it to. Yeah, sometimes having the sand in a peculiar spot ends up working out. So with that reach of the right hand overhead and the block and a reasonable support for you, maybe you need to go pretty high with the block. But I like the support in the arms this gives, both of them. Eyes relaxing. Feeling the weight of your head into the support of the blanket. And then as the mind gives directions, and see if you can internalize the range of the waist. That's pretty clear and kind of obvious. It's the most tactile sense of this moment. But also the range of the pelvis, which is both left and right leg comes out of it. And the weight of your head into the blanket. If your arm gets a little fatigued, or not only fatigued, but it feels like it's tingly, then you might lower your arm down the sides, right? Maybe on the sandbag, maybe it crosses over to the left arm, that's fine. And feeling where the ribs, even if the only thing you get out of this pose is a feeling of the ribs moving, that's success. It's restoring. Okay, now we're taking a directional shift that could be assessed in a few different ranges depending on your energy level right now. So I prefer that you really tap into that versus doing the most challenging movement for your spine. So the spine on its side, right, is the most soothing with supporting the back, even more than when you're on your back, like flat on the back, because you have to kind of push the arch energy in the lumbar. So this is probably our most soothing back shape for the most part. And so when you roll into get to table pose, I want you to slide the props around. Maybe you've got a ball, so you're going to move that. You're going to get to hands and knees facing probably the back of your space. And we can take it this way. We can either have, you can put a blanket under your knees, but if you're feeling just fine without, go without. So hands, and they feel a little wider than under the shoulders. And then get a real energy of your back mobility. When you're on hands and knees, you might feel you can reach your cat pose now with a wide range, not just a long range through the spine, but even through the pelvis. It's a similar pattern of movement we do on our back with bridge, but you just get more possibility because your hands and your arms are a real significant part of support. So alternate arching and flexing the spine. This is the arch pattern, and here's the flexing pattern. And then keep the bolster across, and then you're going to move into a bit of an up dog. So tilt the waist down. So it just uses the bolster as a support for the hinge. So the front of the hips don't push on the floor, but you have support and angle for the spine arch. Okay. Now, when you come back to table, notice what pulls you back. Is it just that you're trying to practice a pose? Like you have motivation for that, but feel what pulls you back. So I want you to go alternate between the up dog. So there's a little less weight on your hands when your hips are in the bolster, but notice if it's true. And then you come back a little bit, pushing back, and then come back forward. So lengthen, front body, core body through into the thyroid. And then come back to that table and then keep moving back so the toes hook under. And then I have to move my knees in so they're a healthy hips distance, not pushed outwards, and lift up the knees. And then get a feel when you lift up, does it kind of push you forward into the arm muscles? So I want you to feel your feet so they step out wide. That is more important than how close they are in or how far back But take a wider stance, a little bit in from the sides of your mat. Good. And then with that change in circulation to your respiratory system, we're going to keep this for a little bit of time. So you can either stay with the down dog. If it feels helpful, stay with it. Or walk the feet a little forward and then the hands back on the bolster and then lower down your head so the head is below the heart. See if you can use the awareness of that shape or the actual structural position to motivate your pose. So it's an inversion. So my head is down. It's as if I'm trying to take a somersault here. But let the arms slide down, hold the elbows, and then continue that traction of your shoulder down to your elbow. And then that lift of the sitting bones. Now, if it's a bit much onto the feet, you could always move your feet a little wider, just not turning the toes in. So you can experience the circulation through the upper back of the leg. Right? I would be a little curious about when you lift up your rear, how it flows down into the legs, through the lower leg into the foot. Okay, so we're going to flow back into the hands and knees. Hands release the grip, and then take your hands forwards onto the mat. You might have to kind of take a leaping chance there with the hands. And then walk the feet back and lower the knees to cat cow. I don't know if knees go to cat cow, but your knees go down and you take cat cow, chin to chest. Inhale, arch the spine, tail back and up. Exhale, chin to chest, round the back. Inhale, arch. Great. Okay, now as you table it, then take that side sage with the right hip down. So you're going to pivot down with the right hip for the moment. And then, you know, this second side, you might have some different goals, right, with the direction. So when you guide your ribs over that bolster, and then you tuck in your blanket so that you have the support, feel, before you get that sand on you, the weight of the right hip down. Make sure you got that weight bearing position for the hip. And then the sand, you know, ideally you might have sometimes focus on the hip itself because we're working with supporting that frequency, which is equals supporting bone density. So I want to kind of have that above on the hip, and then the bottom hip has that pressure. So trying to grip up in your hip is not going to help. So I would let your waistband really flow, and then feel that left arm reaching over. All right, so feel that reach overhead, left hand to the block, and then lengthen. And if lengthen is not like the first thing that comes to mind when you're here in this shape, then maybe visualize what would length be in this position. If you can't feel it and have that structural sense, maybe visualize it. Breathing. Enjoy where the movement is with the rib cage. Kind of untangle the center vine of the ribs. Right, so spanning from the vertebrae into the rib cage. It's such an interesting structure, right, to experience in these poses. So let's take a few more moments here. Okay. If your head is turning a little bit or you're moving your left arm anywhere it feels comfortable, when you have your sand, on the lower part of the waist or to the hip, you do have freedom to move this upper arm. Right, and in the side, it's just a different range for your joints. So maybe you can express a bit with this one, but tracking the breath. Okay, so with these two sides having some support, but they were not symmetrically worked at the same time, that's the challenge we have put into the ribs. So let's take this next shape, not that you could come through this with a back bend to get on your back, that would be a little tricky. So you'll need to let that left hand help guide your sand away. And then when you roll to the right, you can keep your knee back like this. It might work for you. I tend to stay kind of guarded. I pull the knee towards the right and then I round a bit to come up. So feel that round and then move your bolster so it's over on the right side of your mat. And then let's take a ball or block in the center of your knees. Okay, so you're on your back and you're going to have a block. Where'd my block go? Okay, overhead. So I'm going to put it forward. Now you can use your ball too. The ball is different responsiveness. I think they would both be good on this one. I don't know if I would consider the block as better. I'm just using that because most people have a block, but I think this group is kind of scatter with the ball or block idea. So we'll stay with the traditional idea, whatever there is something between the knees. So as your feet, are separated, there's parallel as you know it. When you're on your back, you can't really see what they're up to. You might notice that when you have your hands down by your hips on the floor, kind of stretch your arms down like the palms are down and you're trying to reach one arm at a time, a little farther down. And I know the muscles, the fascia kind of slides you back to where you started usually. The truth of it all, huh? Now, when you're there, let's get this, get a belt, bring your knees in and then slide the belt, grab a hold of it so both hands have a hold of the belt. And then when you lay it on your mat, across the mat, horizontal, it's going to be a belt with that it's unbuckled so you can hold your belt with your palms open. So I want you to grab the belt, palms open, and be generous with how far out it is. It's not like you're using your belt to scoop up your rear, but it feels like it's kind of there. So take the hands about a little wider than shoulder width, so your thumbs are kind of hooked out. And then as your shoulders are back, you're trying to slide your arms down. This is a little easier to keep them down. And then as you lift up your hips in bridge pose, this is where you decide if you want the blanket or not. I know some of you have already shed the blanket from under your head or didn't add it. And then I want you to try to keep those arms reaching down, pulling the belt. You can bring your hands closer in on the belt to try as well. And then maintain this lift and lower. Who knows, maybe the belt's going to hold your rear up a little bit when you lower down. You might find that works. But alternate lifting, try to go through the range of your back. You can tell that we don't do the full curve when we come down like we do in cat-cow. The equivalent would be knees to chest kind of position. So for now, we're going to be with this. So hold the belt firm, but let the shoulders center down, lift the hips, of course. And then that object between is it's a spacer. And get a feel when you lift up and you find you're lifting your maximum for breathing comfort. Okay, so feel how the lungs have to bear a little bit more determination when you're holding the lift. And they do work a little harder. Okay, now lift up the heels so that you still have that item between the knees. So you still have some squeezing to do, even though by now it's just automatic. Now, when you lower down the spine with the heels a little bit up, lower the spine. Okay, and then we're going to take the belt and we're going to buckle up the legs. So heels down, relax, and then buckle up. And then get a feel when you have your belt. Now you have these two leg actions. You've got the pushing out and pushing in at the same time, right? A little bit of a pelvic conundrum. So you're going to be very equipped to do this now. You've got all your equipment. So you might bring your knees in and move your belt so you have it for certain secure. And I would keep it so that when you have your belt firm on the legs, it's, the legs are, holding the block. So that's as far as you're going to pull your belt. You already got that defined. Now, when you bring your arms overhead, you might get rid of your blanket by now. You'll bring your arms over, and as they are in a reaching position, maybe to the blanket, you're going to keep that lift. Now, there's these two different directions with the legs, I know. So see if you can have them both peacefully working, that you're holding the ball or block, and you also have the legs a little bit pushing out. So it's nice for the spine. Now lower the spine, and maybe your arms eventually get down. Okay, now bring the knees to your chest and move the blocker ball out. And then as you lower down your feet, you're going to inhale, lift the hips up and the arms overhead. And then exhale, lower the spine. And as your arms move down, I want you to bring your knees to your chest with the hands on the floor. Okay, and then alternate. So arms go back, feet go down, hips lift up. There we go. We're flowing with the bridge poses now. That's good. And then get a feel when you traction your spine and your arms flow. Instead of trying to make it a certain way, some of you might have your arms flowing down much quicker than me, or vice versa, or not knowing if it's even worthwhile to focus on them. Try to let the body parts all work in some sort of synchronicity, right? So I'm lifting the hips, I'm moving back with the arms. There's moments it feels pretty good. And then when you lower your spine, then your knees come in towards your chest. Okay, so take a moment here where you have the legs and still in that bound shape. Move the belt to the knee so it's a little bit lower, and tighten it down so that your legs are no wider than hips distance. Push out into the belt with the leg muscles a bit right now. The knees probably have this kind of funny appearance, right? They just kind of point out. So the point of this is that I want you to have the belt firm enough that, of course, if you really were to stare into the knee structural equilibrium, you'll find that when you push out here, let your back muscles balance, okay? And then you're going to lower your feet. Now you might bring your hands at the very top of the thighs, because the hands, I don't know why I have to turn them like this to do that, but it seems to be what I have to do to fit my index to my thumb. That webbing fits there. The things you study in life, right? This fits here, this holds this. I'll use this to help me out. All right, so you want to plant that hip like this is a brace, right? So now when you lift up your hip bones, okay, now you're going to slide your hand to the side and then back around so it kind of holds the the posterior part of your SI joint back here. So if you were to poke your thumbs into the very back of the top, well, it's kind of glute medius that you're trying to reach to actually. And so I want you to try to keep that whole front of your hips lifting. and supported. And if it feels kind of weak in this frame where you're holding, like it wants to crash land, then put a block under you and see if that does a little bit of help with your muscle memory, right? And you actually can relax on the block. You don't have to hold it up. But I want you to work for a few moments here on feeling these connections in the back of the pelvis and the hips strengthening. And you don't have to hold it up the whole time. I'm going to use a block, a little bit of both. And then feeling where the rear muscles balance. It's a lot of work to hold yourself up like this. If you kind of, sense what the pelvis has to operate to do this, it's the opposite of your daily habit, right? In prolapse, when you're like standing up and all this center stuff just kind of drags down. So some yoga is trying to help you with the tone in that area. Okay, so pelvic floor tone. So as you push down into your feet, I know you're pushing out into the belt because that's just what the body's going to try to fight and do. I want you to then lift up your hips again. Some of you didn't maybe use the block, but if you did, slide it out. And then let your spine, but use your thumbs to kind of push the tail down and through, like your tail is reaching down, like you're flattening. Okay. Then get a blanket under your head and unbuckle. I'm going to try to reach down so I'm not pulling my knees to my chest. Reach down to unbuckle, or if you need to kind of get your knees in to do that quickly, you can. And then as the right leg reaches down, you want to find that if you are near a wall, you can push into it, but you don't want it to keep the knee from lengthening out. And then take the hands at the front of the hip bones, bend the left knee so that left foot the bottom is down, and then get a feel of your back muscles arching in the lower back area, not necessarily a certain part of the vertebrae, but just the lower area. And then help your leg, just let it go on its own. Instead of forcing it with your hands, feel the left leg cross over to the bolster. And then, kind of play with this movement of the leg crossing and then the sand on. There it is. Okay. Sand on left. If you're not using sand, no worries. You don't have to use it. But you might find once this gets grounded, then the waist, and some of this is kind of mystery fascia that doesn't really know what it's doing, right? So give it some direction. Not necessarily you need to force things and massage it out, but feel that left arm move out. And then once it's out, it's not moving a lot, right? It just stays still. But with that frequency, you're going to let your head roll to the left on the blanket. Okay, and then be sure the sand is in a good spot, that you can feel that it offers some traction. I find that if I slide it down a little bit, it kind of changes what feels good on that. So you might work with your sand or no sand. And then experience the twist momentum really comes from your navel center. Your eyes closed, your head turned left, and then breathing. Take several moments here. There's a chance that this crossover doesn't feel as much in the outer hip as it did with the belt. That's a possibility. But it is a little bit more kind of natural twist, right? Because you're not using this outside force into the joint. But that's a good one for strength, so we've got to find some balancing things through our practice. Okay, I forgot the ball at the safe one. Sometimes I'll remember and many times I won't, but you can always add it if you haven't already. I don't think we want people to unmute and teach, but you know, if you felt the desire, I suppose that could work. So get a feel before we come out of it. As if you're in this crossover right now, your leg is over to the bolster. Can you motion awareness like the tail moves downwards, just plumb line straight down? So it's more of a visualization than it's possibly an energy that you're keeping it reaching down. I just don't want you to cramp up and tighten the back muscles so they go back up towards the chest or the energy goes back up. Let things kind of flow downwards. Okay, so as you move your items that have been attached to the leg or the attachment at the SI, then you'll move that left leg, and let's take a reclining pigeon. Okay, so we'll just simply roll on the back and then slide the right foot in, left foot to right knee. Now this could be this direction without pulling my right leg in. You can keep it here. This might feel really good for you. You could center right here. Feel the left knee open. You can also draw the legs towards you and hug under the right leg. Pull. So lengthen in that back zone, or do you feel like it widens? I think the work is in the widening. So rocking side to side seems kind of natural for this one, instead of a fixed frame. They're all taught and they're all fine, right, with those two variations. So feel what works in the moment and gather your attention on the breath. Now, if the right foot is kind of lifting, if your foot is off the floor, like it's trying to push up, and encourage that, just letting it be, just let it go. So it's pretty highlighted in the left hip. And now release the grip of the back of the leg, simply lower down the foot. And then when you uncross through that left foot, I want you to windshield wiper your knees and let the arms, they can be kind of in this frame by the sides, they can be open, they can be back. So what feels the reaction in the hip, in the waist, right? So the hip and the waist. You know, they're different, right? The knees are gonna move and that's gonna start to help the hip. And then the waist is gonna help the breathing and the back, right? So next time you go to get your bolster, as if you were planning on it anyway, take it over to the left side of your mat. It could be your beginning. Next time you get your bolster. So when we start with our opposite siding, and you'll get a feel here, maybe you put the hands at the top of the thigh band or maybe lower waist on the top of each leg. And then sweep the left leg down and lift that right leg. And then instead of pulling onto the leg with your hand, you want to get a feeling of like you're kicking that leg over to the left, right? So I know you're not out in the field playing soccer or anything right now, but it's like you're trying to kind of visualize that kick across. So you're working this whole back frame. And we're limited in a body. I mean, that's a limitation we're going to have here. So you're limited in your motion pattern, but make it feel like you're not focusing on the limitation. You're just kind of like, you're just letting it go, letting it kick and reach. And then if you add your sand and maybe a ball, the ball's good to start with usually on this one. Sometimes it's forgotten. Something else is captivating or just forgotten. So we add the sand, we have some purpose with positional sense for the joint. And there's multiple joints that are focused on here, isn't that true? So again, let it be that felt sense of reaching from this outer hip over to the bolster. Right arm could be open, right hand could be kind of on that sand, kind of guiding it downwards, the hip downwards. So should the hip go over to the left or should it be moving downwards? Okay, so what you want to get a feeling of is moving it over to start. And then once it gets into its range, that's feeling, comfortable enough. It might feel like a stretch, but you can be with it. The other things you might work on is the lower leg. You might need to bend, and it really helps out the balance internally. So I don't want you to overdo it though in the joint. So if it feels like it's too much, then you might need to put your sand higher on the hip, more soothing. You might go without the sand completely. And then you might even put on your right arm, the sandbag. Okay, let your head turn to the right. Now, if by the breath you get a feeling of that right hip kind of moving downwards or guiding it with your hand, that would be helpful. If there's any reservation in the chest muscles, like you feel like you're gripping, this is a really good opportunity to let that go on your back. So just letting the arms open, chest open. I know this is what we've come to at this point, right? In our structures, just to find those simple things. So breathing and feeling where that lower body is circulating the most. Is it your hip? Is it your leg? If it doesn't feel anything on your knee, that's great. If it does, you can always add a blanket on the bolster to support the knee. Sometimes that's important. So give a few more moments here. Enjoy the breath. Now, when we move into that reclining pigeon, feel what you have achieved in the circulation event here. Because the reclining pigeon is a fixed pose, right? At least the foot is fixed on the crossing. So this one is not so fixed, even though you kind of put things on that are stuck. But when you organize the movement, each side probably has a little more difference maybe than the pigeon one, even though it might feel different on one side, but it's likely structured pretty balanced. So roll onto the back, and then once your leg is off the bolster, you can get a feel of that crossing of that right foot to left knee, and the right knee is open. You can see it pretty good. And this is a nice beginning, right? I find this is just fine. You don't have to add on, squeeze in. Sometimes structure is more important than, deepening sensation. So, kind of feel knee open, or when you bring the leg in, hold the back of the left, then feel when that is pulled in, what's achieved that's different than when the foot is on the floor. I feel when I hold on to the back of that left leg that it goes into the inner thigh as well. It's kind of moving it in a different gravitational pull than if my foot was on the floor, right? So they both have some benefit, I think. Just choose one of them. Or you could go between the two, off and on. we won't know. But when you're holding onto that left leg, these are all like just different directions. We do all the same pose patterns usually, it's all a mixture, a mishmash. But when we started, we had that left leg in front, or no, we had the right leg in front, left leg over. But at any rate, we had a leg below and then a leg crossing. So this is enhancing into the hip. It's a nice thing to do way after that first pose to support the bones. So I want us to get a decent amount of hip work today, right? So when we focus on the final spinal coming up here, and we feel like we worked that area into the back. So when you let go of your leg, you want to get yourself ready to come up. And I want you to make some choices here that feel comfortable for you in your core. So you can uncross. And then as the knees are a little bit apart, you want to let the legs squeeze back in. So it's like give them a few times moving in and moving away, even some inches away when they move away. And then you want to let your bone structure inhabit a bit of a roll. Hold the legs, come up, or don't hold the legs and roll up. And then once you're up, you're going to get 2 blankets, and they're going to be stacked up across, so they're horizontal, kind of your typical fold. This is our average folding we just fill up our mat side to side, right, horizontal. And then when you're up, bring the right foot in, cross the left leg in front of the right, and simple cross-legged Sukhasana. And then we take our block besides the right knee, so my block is flat, and then I point my bolster kind of on the block, and then it just lowers down, right? So it's kind of tipped up, little seesaw over there. Okay, so make sure that the bolster is supported on the block. So I tend to have to pull my bolster a little bit up on the block. And then you get a choice to have a sandbag on the left leg, but if it already feels like it's kind of having some challenge crossing, then you might put a ball or a block under it. You could do both. You could put a ball under it. This would kind of work good. You have to find where it fits nicely. It's just kind of holding it because your left foot is turned out. But even though it looks like it's just kind of there, it's not necessarily doing a lot of, special techniques, but it is turned out. So I try to get that sand onto the upper leg, and then I want my waist to have some movement. So don't let it get snagged onto your sandbag. And then pivot your lower, thoracic that's doing the twist, kind of your lower ribs do the turn. But once you turn the hands onto the bolster, kind of push awareness in the lowest part of your back, and then slide your hands down the bolster to the right. And you're going to bring your elbows maybe on that. Now, if it's a little challenge with the purchase on the block, you might have to slide quite a bit down. You can always add a second block, right? So you could have one block that's next to the other block, or kind of sort of next to it, and put that bolster on there. That works nicely. Those work pretty good. That seems a little more balanced for me, actually, but usually I go with the bolster dive. But there's no usual. So feel where you can lower your head and experience the circulation in your back. So it might be really rounded, might be flexed, or you might work with spine extension. So there's not a roundedness, but there's a lift. So let's just play with that for a moment. Which direction is best for your circulation? Okay, now I'm assuming you feel this a little bit in your left hip. Okay, now notice what part of the hip feels it. It may be different than when we were on our back with the crossover, but it may be leading up into this waist. So reach your right arm out on the bolster. I know the bolster for most of us, I think, is tipped, but this is why I like it with the 2 blocks now. Okay, so try to reach down with that right arm and then let the waist turn to the left and bring the left hand behind your back, A, or B. Lift your arm up. See if it will go. Once it gets to a certain shape, it usually feels a little better. So feel where the waist turns. As the waist turns. Breathing. Okay, now lower that left hand, and we're going to turn the shape so that when you turn the left hand actually over to the bolster, you're going to slide to come up. We're keeping it real simple, and then move the bolster right in front. I would take the sand off of the left leg and the ball if it's there, and then position your left foot out. Try to get both of the legs to have that moment outwards, but you could put a block under each leg if that helps your balance. Somebody's hand is raised. Did I raise my hand on the far? You see that on the bottom of your screen? It has a hand raised that says your hand is raised. Who raised their hand? Somebody. I don't know. Okay, if my hand is raised, I guess it is. I don't think it's bothering anybody though. Okay, so I've got a block under each leg. It looks like we're all here. Okay, so leaning forwards. I guess a hand raised is better than any other little icon there, so that's fine. Okay. Leaning front. So I've got blocks under the legs, as I mentioned a zillion times. But when you're reaching, you want to feel that center line, that plumb line. And the tail doesn't necessarily have a sense of being in or back. It's sort of neutral. So the back muscles are in a reach. Okay, now if the brain is tilted, I know the cervical spine energy can be a little wishy-washy in these poses. So feel that reach of the arms, that sense of extending, breathing. Yeah, that's a good amount of time. And then come back. It's like we're marinating there. And then move that left foot in, cross the right leg in front, take the bolster over to the left side. You might use 1 to 2 blocks on that side. You have a cross-legged position with the right leg in front. I like the 2, it seems. The 2 blocks. Yeah, the tuba blocks. So when I have a sandbag on the right leg, emphasize the kind of fixed position of the cross-legged bones here. So you're not like careening to the left and then letting your right knee bob up. So you want to isolate in your torso a little bit to turn left so the lower body stays secure. And then we reach over. I got like the ball under my knee. Reach over to the left with your torso and lower down. Maybe the hand is lowered by just doing this. So as the back has its natural curve and the weight into that right leg with the sand. Yeah, so much has been kind of shifted and moved around in the practice without even leaving your mat. There's a lot you can do just on a mat. And now you get to pace yourself with this movement. Either you stay reaching a little to the left like you are with your arms on the bolster. If this feels fine, you could stay with it. But the other option would be to start to reach out with that left arm, and then you turn to the right and you let that right arm maybe reach back or stretch over the side. Okay, so with the direction of the waistband, turn. Okay, your head can turn down towards the left arm. You can let the right hand be holding the back a little bit, or the hand behind you, just resting into your back. And exploring with the arm perhaps lifting, or come back to the first position, right? No problem. You don't have to stay in that crossover with the arm and the waist. That's okay. Whatever works for you is fine, as long as the legs have kind of stayed in the same frame. Yeah, they've had a good amount of work today. So when you move your arms back to the bolster, we're going to round up for a moment and then take the bolster to the front on top of a couple blocks. The blocks are tilted to the second height. You'll naturally take your sand away for the moment and the legs span. So when you put your feet up on your bolster, I would scoot forward and get a second, well, actually not a second, get a blanket on the bolster, then the legs up. And then once you lower onto your back, you want to scoot your seat fairly close. I mean, you don't need to be right next to it with your seat, but lower your head back on your blanket and then let the legs either have sand on the shins or a sandbag at the lower branch of the rib cage. So it might feel like it's on the belly. If this is like squishing you out, your organs are responding, and it doesn't feel good on your back, because that can happen. You turn the sandbag from the heart to the belly lengthwise, and that can feel really nice on the spine. And then as you coordinate the eyes resting back and taking off any hardware you have on, and then relaxing. If you have an eye pillow, put that on, or you could place the heels of your hands just above your eyelids and then let the hands help guide the eyelids down. So there's a curtain of darkness. And relax your arms beside you, either down or open. Return to that full breath. Exhale completely. And feeling the body actually push into the sand a bit with the circulation of the breathing muscles. It actually works. It's a little workout. Now with the feet still floating, can you let the feet be real casual so they're not trying to move, they're just relaxed. But then feel the tailbone center. If you can just anchor that base of the spine. And then above all of that, there is above the spine, there's that core moving with breath. So let's take that all the way through the end of the practice here. Lower down the sand if it's on your core. And then get a feel of your feet circling. Give a moment of rotation, and that goes out, but it also goes back in and circles. See if you can work with the bones that are closest to the ankle that turn versus the toes, trying to push out. So you're kind of working the denser part of a foot. Not that toes are not important, but just feel kind of that lurking base of your leg. And let it be, stillness. And take your time. If you start to come around to sitting quickly, you might want to slow it, bring the knees to bending, and rock the knees a little bit in towards your center as you are still on your back, and then roll to the side. And come on up. Take a moment to find seat and the hip bones out into the leg parts. And then as it moves down at the ground level, see if you can get a feeling of centering up and easefully to the heart level. The hands arrive together in front of the heart and bowing the brain down into the heart center. And let's surrender here as a collective, just feeling the shift in your body from practice, receiving and breathing in and exhale, bowing into the space behind your heart. Namaste. Thank you. Okay. Hand is raised.